Now we go to the back. Gordon Soley is interviewing Michael Hayes and Jimmy Jam Garvin. He's got, okay, I've actually written this down. And I believe, do you know what? I'm going to save this for the next episode. And I hate to say that because we just don't. No, actually, do you know what? I'm going to bring it up. Jimmy Jam Garvin at this point, Jim Cornette, according to Jim Cornette, was absolutely on the gas at this point, and he was trying to get as big as he possibly could do, and was almost trying to work like a road warrior style kind of thing at this point in his career. So, do you remember this point of the new Freebirds and those coming in, and also Michael Hayes and Michael Hayes, but Jimmy Jam Garvin basically completely trying to change the way he works to have like a more Smash Mouth style in a company that has Doom and the Steiners and the Road Warriors and Sid?
Yeah. I can't say what went into Jimmy's machinations. My guess would be probably, getting a little bit older and figured, rather than doing a lot of the other stuff, because, and I won't get into the match too much, but he has a sequence of a spot with Johnny where you see him, going back to that old Jimmy Garvin style. My recollection of that time frame was that it's hard to say what came first, the chicken or the egg. The Philadelphia crowd's reaction to us was pretty notable. And at some point, you can't. It's a lot easier to swim downstream than up, but they were almost playing to that, and as heels,
yes,
on that. Let the crowd continue to boo us. That's going to be what that is. But they stopped being who they're supposed to be and started playing almost like the rules had been reversed, which I think brought it down. There was also at this time this, we're in the immediate aftermath of what had been the Freebirds, a pretty prodigious run. So I think the fans they love Jimmy Garvin, and the Philadelphia fans, they always love the heels. Also love the Freebirds, but now we're seeing this new version of it. As I recollect,
I do apologise. Do you think the Philly crowd really understood the Freebirds, the original Freebirds, and what they were comparing them to? Because the Freebirds never made it up to Philly, did they?
No, but again, we're at this time now that wrestling has been much like I was in Pittsburgh. I was able to catch the Freebirds and, with cable and everything. And the Freebirds were, again, pretty impactful stable of wrestlers that were pretty ubiquitously known in and around wrestling. I think it helped the fact that it was in Philadelphia against the Dynamic Dudes. Like Chris said, isn't it funny that like 4 or 5 years later, one of the top heels in the industry is going to be one of these guys getting booed as a face. But they almost played to that. Like if you see the play times when they're almost playing babyface. My recollections of that match were Johnny exploded afterwards in the dressing room because as we were like calling our stuff, they were like audibling and saying, "No, do this." And I've talked about that before, like with Sean and stuff. When you're in a match trying to call a match, the action's moving. So your brain is already thinking like 3-4 moves ahead. And so you're calling to the stuff to get you there. And then somebody goes, "No, this instead." No, now your brain goes, "Oh, back up a second. No, backdrop." And then back forward again. And so it becomes this real herky-jerky fighting each other instead of working with each other to get to the destination of where you're trying to get the match. It was noteworthy to me that Jimmy, I commented to Moose, I said, "Man, look how big Jimmy is." And I hadn't remembered that prior, but then you said it now, looking back, that would be my guess. Jimmy's getting on a little bit now, right? And Michael too. And you got two 20-year-old kids standing over here full of piss and vinegar it's a lot easier to go out there and do this than arm drags and backdrops or whatever. But once the match settled into itself, even though there were all these other things going on in the backstory, you could still see that there was still a semblance of the match being pushed together there. So like to me, it looked almost like Jimmy and Michael were having fun. Oh my God, we're finally getting popped and cheered, almost like with the Sid on the opposite way. Getting caught up in that as opposed to focusing on what the match should have been. But again, at some point, you can't, nothing worse to me than when a heel goes out in front of a crowd and the crowd's completely quiet, and the heel yells, "Shut up!" If it gets any quieter, like you'd have to be in a library, right? It just looks silly and out of place. And at some point, they would have had to just go and play with it. With the reaction they're getting, because it's so not what the company is trying to portray. But why would you, if somebody's cheering you and you've been as a heel, and all these years you've been telling everybody how great you are and everything else, now they're cheering you, why would you be pissed at that? Why would you fight back against it? Only if it's fake wrestling, but we're supposed to be getting booed, so we'll do this. It just, to me, I think you said Moose had texted you. I was like chuckling to myself because I remembered being there. I used to get, like, as we were landing in places like Philadelphia or Buffalo, New York, Troy, New York, places upstate New York, all those Northeast cities are heel towns, big time heel towns. And so one thing they weren't going to like was these smarmy, pussy looking baby faces, right? Just this poor booking by WCW to put that match on there. If they were expecting for Johnny and I to get over and them to get booed, that probably wasn't the place to do it. They always say you know your audience, and that clearly was WCW again rearing its head. They didn't know their audience.
You said that Michael Hayes was getting on in years. He just turned 30 a few months earlier. So
that's Michael Hayes years.
I suppose. Well, at some point he's got to be pickled and preserved for quite a long time. Do you know what? Just because we're on Michael Hayes, and I really want to know about this, is I've actually written here, because you mentioned, the beginning of the match was getting a bit clunky. There's something I wrote here, was the first proper spot in the match is that you throw a clothesline for Hayes to duck, but instead he leaps into it like a salmon going upstream. And I thought there's a total disconnect of what was going to happen then. And then he takes a weird net breaker as well. Michael Hayes is a worker. Forget about the charisma and the interviews and everything like that. It's always been said that he was the charisma and the other guys surrounding him was the workers. But Michael Hayes as a worker to work with, what did you make of him? Middling?
Not this. Just there. To me, even in this match, you can see like Jimmy is the shine, right? Michael has all that charisma and he can do all of that. And it's like that in a lot of teams. I mean, look at Midnight Express. Stan Lane will be the first to tell you Bobby's the workhorse, right? Stan's going to get in and do his dancing and smile at the girls and do all of that. But Bobby was the engine in that team. So this isn't a slam of Michael. Michael was great because Michael was great on the stick. Michael was great because he had Terry Gordy and Buddy Roberts with him, right? And now Jimmy. And Jimmy was, known as a fairly decent worker. So, but there's, again, we talked about this with Mike a few seconds ago, Rotunda. The business is changing. The business is different than the business had been then. And I think that Michael was smart enough to identify that. There needs to be somebody with that charisma and the gift of gab and everything. So I think it did play together well as far as the two of those guys together. I noticed the first thing you did. Remember, we had talked about this before with the Razor Ramon thing. If I want you to duck two clotheslines, both those clotheslines are going to come with the same arm. And when he comes off to the second one, you can see like there's like some kind of like you said, like jumping into it or whatever. And then I think right after that, you can see me trying to again call something to him, and it goes awry. I think at the time, and again, like it's I don't want to sound like I'm slamming guys. I'm trying to explain it in my own head. Prior to this time period, the heels would typically call the match, right? And so Johnny and I would typically be, if it was 5 to 10 years earlier, would be listening to them and throwing our stuff in. But by now, it's becoming like sort of this mishmash, like catch as catch can. You call your stuff, we'll call our stuff. Once those transitions have been made, once we're out of the shine and into the heat, we're listening to you. When we're going into the comeback, you listen to us. And I think it was very representative in that match as I'm looking at it. And again, remembering in the dressing room back, Johnny throwing things and kicking garbage cans and stuff over, really pissed about that lack of chemistry in there. It was like, I remember Johnny screaming, "It's not supposed to be us and them. It's supposed to be us, all four of us." Him screaming that in the dressing room with some pretty color expletives in between, colorful expletives. But, you know, again, this is when the business is in transition. And look, one thing I can tell you for sure, certain is at this point, looking back, when you have a crowd that solidly one way, and again, any of us could have told you before that show, that's going to be a heel town. To just presume that you can go into that town because you're going to be televising it or pay-per-viewing it to other audiences. It's, you know, for an audience in the South that are more babyface towns, watching the babyface team get booed like that, deeply booed, probably not the best look. I mean, as a company, now you're pushing to pull against yourself. Okay, we want these guys over his faces, but they're going to get the shit booed out of them in this town. Poor booking.